Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Integrity Matters by Turnitin. My name is Chooks, and with me in the house today, we've got the unique pleasure of talking to Michelle Charlton, who is the principal Specialized VET Services. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Trooks. How are you going?
Very well, thank you. I know it's a bit cold, but we're good to rumble today. Today
Yes.
we're going to be exploring a little bit about what it looks like in the assessment design space for the vet sector. So we're going to look at fairness, flexibility, and validity of assessment design in the vet space. But before we get to that topic, let's get to meet Michelle. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, your professional and academic background, of course, and what excites you about the work you do in at the Specialized VET Services?
Well, thanks, Trooks. Thanks for having me. It's such a great pleasure and a privilege to come and talk to you. Um, you know, I know we're time limited, so I'll give you the abridged version. For me, to answer your question, there's a few parts to your question there. I've got varied experience in my background, work experience. I've owned and run my own businesses. I've employed others in various sectors, not just the vet sector. Plus, I've worked for others and managed businesses for others. So for me, I think this has really served me well as it helps me to understand all of the unique complexities that come from being an employer versus a sole trader versus an employee. Um, Actually, I started off in retail hardware where I learned valuable skills such as problem solving and asking the right questions. And believe it or not, they're the two things that I still use on a daily basis in my current job. And one of my first jobs out of high school actually was as a Japanese speaking sales assistant for an international luxury goods company. And that's worlds away from what we do now. But, since that job in the late 90s, I worked for, large and small companies, public, private, plus government organizations. And with each appointment, I've been just so lucky to learn something along the way. So, learn about the job, learned about the product, about the sector that it was in, about the people, and about myself. So all of that, I think, although it's a bit of a zigzag path to where I am now, it's really stood me well. And my experience in vet as a trainer in vet actually came about almost by chance. I was studying to become a high school teacher. And as part of the teaching practicum, I landed placement with an RTO. And I've been in the sector ever since. I've been a trainer and assessor, I've been an RTO branch manager, instructional designer, instructional design manager, resource developer, assessment specialist. But now I focus more on the creation and the validation of training and assessment materials rather than the delivery of it. So I really enjoy validation work because that's just because of what it entails. I think it suits my mindset. And plus, I get to see materials that come from so many different sectors and usually get to learn a thing or two along the way. So that's a really good part of it. As part of our business, Specialised VET Services, we do have an arm within that's a professional development side of the business. And I really enjoy hosting the skills education sessions. We've got some great presenters in the program and they come along and share, what they're passionate about, what their particular field of expertise is. And over the couple of years that we've been running skills education, we've seen a shift in what people are keen to learn more about. So that has been very interesting because it reflects what's happening in the vet sector. The other part of your question was about my academic background. And in terms of that, I've always enjoyed the role of being a learner and being a student. And so far, I've had the opportunity to earn a couple of formal qualifications. I've got a number of vocational qualifications, including the diplomas of VET and training design and development, as well as tertiary degrees in the areas of psychology, adult and vocational education, and I've got a master's in training and development. I'm doing some more study at the moment too. So this time it's in the field of education and learning science within the digital environment. And that's just so fascinating and interesting. I'm enjoying that course, but truth be told, I'm probably enjoying access to all those journal articles that the uni library gives me access to.
Why not if you're going to study it? Thank you so much. It sounds like you've come with a wealth of knowledge. I was particularly interested in the fact that you did the Japanese bit. I
Yeah.
was like, that is very exciting. So I see that you do have different, or I'll say you wear different hats in different disciplines. And over the years, you've transitioned. I know the vet sector is looking at um, getting creating this ecosystem that can support
Mm.
lifelong learning.
Yes.
People continue learning, which is really good, and I've learned about that over the course of the past few weeks.
Yep. Yep.
So to kick us off today, we're looking at assessment design, and I know that really means a different thing for the vet sector. Can you begin by letting us understand what authenticity means in assessment design and how trainers and assessors take this into consideration when they're designing assessments?
So authenticity in vet is related more to the evidence. So in vet, authenticity of assessment is actually one of the rules of evidence. So I'll just go back a step to explain all vet providers are governed by the legislative instrument, which is the Standards for RTOs 2015, which is made under the NVR Act 2011. Now, these standards outline the requirements that all registered training organisations have and must meet to satisfy their compliance obligations for ongoing registration and to be able to continue to deliver nationally recognised training and assessment. Clause 1.8 within these standards is related to the requirements of assessment, and the rules of evidence are part of the stipulations that are contained in Clause 1.8. There are four rules of evidence: validity, sufficiency, authenticity, and currency. Now, in vet, when an assessor makes a judgment on any evidence that a student puts forward in their claim for competency, as per the rule of evidence of authenticity, the assessor has to be assured that what the learner is putting forward is their own work. So, in the case where evidence for skills performance, say for example, is being demonstrated, that's direct evidence that the assessor is reviewing. It's pretty straightforward in that case because the assessor can see that the student is carrying out the task. They're viewing an authentic piece of evidence right there in that performance. Of course, having said that, there is the assumption that the assessor knows that student and is able to verify that Jane's student is actually Jane's student. However, there are the mechanisms that, can be used to verify student identification prior to the commencement of assessment. And a lot of RTOs do this with the provision of photo ID, where the student is saying, I am who I say I am, and here's the evidence to prove that. When it comes to collecting evidence in other ways, especially in remote settings, the assessor has to have other means to verify the authenticity of that evidence that the student's putting forward for assessment. And sometimes this can be built into the RTO's learning management system. So, um, there might be the assumption that it's only the learner that can log in and access and complete the tasks. Sometimes, and most frequently, there's a declaration written in or built in to the assessment where the student has to acknowledge, sign, and verify that they're saying that this is me and everything that I'm putting forward for the assessor to review is my own work. So that declaration is a very common mechanism that RTOs use. When an assessor also has the opportunity to get to know their students, the issue of being assured that the evidence is being submitted from the student as their own work gets a little easier. But of course, on its own, that's still not 100% foolproof. It's a combination of avenues to be able to verify student identity and the authenticity of the work submitted by them for marking. That's probably one of the best approaches to take. And this includes, for example, cross-referencing items of evidence. So within a pool of evidence that a student will put forward as part of their claim for competency, the assurances that the assessor can get are strengthened. And an example of this, Chooks, would be like, say, if there was a third-party verification report that's been completed by the student's workplace supervisor, the supervisor presumably has seen the student do all of the things that they're signing off on. Um, they know the student for who they are and they've made a comment on the performance. This then can be verified by the assessor in, the student's claim for competency, and the assessor is able to correlate that with other pieces of evidence that the student might have been submitting. So it's not a relatively straightforward answer, but there are a couple of mechanisms that can be used, particularly with the understanding of what authenticity of evidence in VET actually means.
Well said. And I think for me, this is actually a big learning curve because I come from the higher education sector, and trying to understand what authenticity means across different sectors is very important. And you clearly articulated what these means. I think also I think also part of the conversation, you slightly alluded to what might be a challenge there as well, but I want you to address that further. So what are some challenges to how assessments are designed and delivered in the VET sector? And what are some opportunities for improvement?
That's $1 million question, and it's probably got a billion answers. I might just go back to go forward. So, we've just been talking about the authenticity of the evidence and the mechanisms that are designed into the assessment tools that an RTO uses, as well as the procedures of the RTO's assessment system, can contribute to authenticity in VET. And in terms of what that means for the vet sector overall, it's a reputational thing too. So, when a student is awarded their qualification, everyone wants to be assured that the student can actually do what their piece of paper says they can. So employers want this, industry wants this, customers want this. I mean, if I put my child into childcare as a customer, I want to know that the staff there, the ones that hold the vet qualifications, can actually look after my child, that the person who's awarded the credential does actually have the knowledge and skills to do the job, and that the vet sector is producing skilled graduates. So, in this sense, the vital importance of authenticity is absolutely clear. But when we're talking about challenges around how assessments are designed, we're going back a step before we can achieve what it is that we're wanting with that authenticity. And when I answer this question, I want to preface my response in by saying that there are some really great providers out there doing wonderful work, and most RTOs are in business for the right reasons and they've got absolute good intentions. It just so happens that assessment seems to be one of the biggest challenges for RTOs, and historical audit data from the National Vet Regulator point to figures that show approximately 75% of all RTOs weren't able to, at audit, meet the requirements linked to Clause 1.8, which, remembering, that's all about assessment. And in our experience, the assessment tools that are in use are likely the major contributors to these issues. If I knew the exact solution, I probably would have been retired by now, but I'm not yet. So all I can do is offer you my opinion. And some of the factors that I see as probably part of the cause are these. So, firstly, vet is preparing people for a vocation. When assessments are theory driven or they're undertaken in the absence of a workplace, and a workplace, it's got inherent pressures, there's constraints, other people, processes, and all of the peripheral learnings that come as all of those things, I think the outcomes can be somewhat sterile. And I mean, by saying that, at work, stuff happens and it's rarely in isolation to other things. And someone who's competent at their job, they can handle that and still do everything that's required. So when a student is assessed without the richness of all of that workplace environment and its goings on, I think we can be somewhat limiting, or maybe we're overreaching perhaps on the judgment of what skills and knowledge we can say that that student has for that particular role. So that's one thing. And a lot of units and qualifications can be delivered and assessed in simulated environments. And in itself, simulated environments are fantastic for learning. They provide a scaffolded, safe environment for learners to explore, to fail, to try again, and to really hone their skills. All of those steps really that go toward the acquisition of knowledge and skill. But when that simulated environment is not truly representative of an authentic workplace environment, and it has it's lacking all of the characteristics and pressures that come with a workplace, one has to ask how genuine the learning's going to be and how transferable any skills that the student picks up are going to be able to be replicated into the workplace. So, having said all of that, one of the great things about VET, of course, is that we can prepare people for work. When people are not in the workplace or they're not in the particular industry that they want to be in, VET allows them access to learning and assessment through courses that can be taken outside of a workplace. And that's fantastic. So, we've got some two competing points of view here, and the practicalities and opportunities from each have to be balanced. Secondly, and we see a lot of this in our validation work, assessments are not written in such a way as to collect evidence as required by the unit of competency. So every qualification is built using units of competency, and those units of competency are the standards of performance required in the workplace. And some of the common issues that we see include invalid tasks. So the unit is asking for evidence that the student can do something, that they can perform a particular skill, but the assessment has been designed to elicit hypothetical and or theoretical evidence only. Another example of invalid tasks are when the wording of the assessment question doesn't match what the unit is asking for. And in some cases, we even see instances of the assessor's marking guide um, being used where the model answers are just simply incorrect. And given that the marking guide is meant to be what the assessor is marking against, you can imagine the issues that this causes. So another issue is the context. I told you this had a million answers.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
$1 billion question with a billion answers. Um, the other issue is the context of the task. So most units of competency are asking for responses in the context of the workplace. So according to workplace policies and procedures, give evidence for such and such. But the assessment has then been designed to collect generic evidence only. So it's not meeting the unit requirements in that regard. And another issue to do with context is just taking a portion of what the unit requires and assessing that out of context of the rest of the performance expectations. And to give you an example of what I mean by this, I saw this one recently. The um, assessment was asking students to just have a conversation with their assessor so that they could cover off the requirements for oral communication skills. But in fact, the unit was actually asking for the oral communication skills to be demonstrated as part of a workplace task. They were supposed to be communicating with stakeholders about an identified workplace problem. So, therefore, because of the way that that particular task had been designed, it was out of context of what the unit required and therefore an invalid task. One of the biggest gaps we see, though, is around the identification of these types of examples to identify them as being invalid. So, best practice dictates that all assessment tools are validated pre use to confirm that they have been designed to collect sufficient valid evidence as per what's required by the unit. The number of times, though, that we see tools marked off as good to go when in fact they're not indicates that there's a skills gap somewhere along the line. The ability to properly analyze a unit of competency for its evidence requirements and then correlate those requirements against what's been designed and developed into an assessment tool and accurately verify whether that tool is fit for purpose is a very specific skill set. And the credentials to train and assess others in VET, they do touch on assessment design and development, but realistically, the job role is completely different. It's our experience that awesome trainers are awesome trainers and assessors, but they're not necessarily awesome validators, or they're not necessarily awesome assessment writers, and vice versa. An awesome assessment writer might not have those precise skills to be great at training and assessment. And I think this could be a huge area for improvement by acknowledging that the tasks require different skill sets and not forcing trainers into something that they may not be interested in, may not be highly skilled at, or completely confident to do. I think we can avoid that square peg, round hole type of scenario and develop streams of professionals who are specialized in these specific skill areas. And as a sector, we can reap the rewards of having great trainers doing great training and great writers developing great assessment tools and great validators being responsible for validating tools. And if someone is good at or interested in all three, that's fantastic. But in my experience, those people are unicorns. It- Cost's another big factor too, Jooks. I mean, it takes time to develop quality tools and it takes time to validate tools properly. And it takes time to assess evidence and provide meaningful feedback to students on that evidence. And when the values placed on these areas of expertise are pushed downwards, we're not likely to attract the most qualified people or the people who are going to give us the quality outputs that we're looking for. So, say, for example, if an RTO allocates funding for validation activity and they stipulate that only 2 hours worth of work are going to be paid for, it's creating a perfect storm for what's called tick and flick thorough analysis and in depth feedback on properly developed tools that cover off all of the unit requirements by collecting valid evidence. Well, that actually takes 2 or maybe 3 times longer than that 2 hour allocation. And if that expertise isn't being funded to get the accurate results and meaningful feedback, this cycle continues because we then have a substandard tool being said to be ready for use. It's then used with students who are then not assessed properly. They're not issued a qualification against the exact unit requirements. They're put into the workforce without the full, skills and knowledge set that their piece of paper says that they do have. And suddenly the sector's getting feedback saying, querying its capacity to supply job ready graduates. And some of this cycle really creates a standard of expectation. So people will see the same things over and over. And if that standard is getting signed off as acceptable, it's considered the norm and the benchmark for acceptable. And the really sad thing is because historically, 75% of RTOs haven't met that benchmark as acceptable at audit. So it's really quite a complex issue that the sector struggles with. And they're just my thoughts. I could probably do 10 sessions on this, but
Yeah, I think you shed light on a lot of pertinent things in the sector. And there's a question that I had with regards to reliability and validity, but I think you've already touched on it. So I think we're just going to move the needle just a bit and now look at strategies for trainers and assessors who are currently watching this and looking and probably just being wowed by your insight into the depth of knowledge you have in the sector. What are some strategies to ensure that that level of validity and evidence is part of the assessment design and the judgment process? And maybe how might technology support or enhance these strategies?
trainers and assessors are experts in their industry. So that's why they've been accredited as a trainer and assessor, that they're wearing two hats, that they're an industry expert and a trainer and assessor. And they keep up to date with their industry through PD and currency activities. So logically thinking, they could ask, is this assessment properly preparing students to work in my vocational field? Is the evidence being sought valid evidence? Is it a valid representation of that actual work role? Does anything seem unusual or out of place in this assessment? And I think the answers to these questions can really point to the validity of the assessment and the evidence being asked for. The other strategy, of course, is to really know the unit requirements, to understand how it's been interpreted and then translated into the development of the assessment tool, and to check that that tool has been validated before use. Any concerns should be raised with the RTO and preferably before the tool's put into use with students, but definitely at any time that it's noticed so that edits can be made, recorded, and applied as and if required. And you also asked about technology. How could technology support that? Technology, brings a wealth of data. With access to technology and with the skills to use it, of course, we can really quickly and easily open the door to so much information, sometimes too much information. But, one of the biggest benefits is that when we know what we want to investigate or verify, technology can make this relatively quick and a comprehensive process. So if I wanted to investigate what's going on in a particular type of industry, I can very quickly and easily get access to the people and all the information with that, with the answers that I need.
There you go. That's a lot of um opportunities for improvement of the assessment design, making sure we're getting that level of validity of the evidence for the assessment. And I actually do like the idea of the trainers and assessors doing different functions as opposed to one person doing everything. I think that might also be a reason why it's usually I'll call it a haphazard process because we're
Mm.
not actually pointing to that. And those three questions, I think it was about three questions that would help in thinking about the assessments will be really good. We're going to keep moving. And this time we're going to look at now we have the assessment all done. We know what we want to test. We know how we want to support students in gathering evidence. So how are delivery and assessment methodologies influencing the thought around integrity and obviously the authenticity of assessment evidence?
The one that really comes to mind is this continued adoption of online methodologies for some or all of the course delivery. So, whilst technology has many advantages and offers a lot of opportunities to the people who can access and use it, it does present this ever changing requirement to adjust processes to support all of the assurances required so that the person submitting the evidence is submitting their own work, as an example. I know throughout 2020, skills education ran a lot of PD in response to initial inquiries from RTOs about how do we maintain our practices in this online environment. Last year and this year, though, the focus has shifted slightly and it's more reflecting the familiarity that most providers now have with this blended or online delivery methodology. And it's now more about, well, how do we design the tools and the processes that allow for this robust assessment and evidence collection that we would normally be doing anyway, that we're hoping that's going to be meeting the requirements, and all of those considerations really focus around the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence as, the main considerations as to how we can continue to supply our product, which of course is the training and assessment via the different methodologies. So it's been an interesting shift just because of all of those externally triggered factors, you might say.
Yeah, I can totally get it. Different things have happened across the
Mhm.
world, and we've got to pivot and try different things. But at the same time, we still need to do the same amount of
Yeah.
learning and teaching just because we have learning outcomes we want to achieve. So I
Yeah.
guess that's a very important answer. As a wrap up, what would you say, or what are some strategies to make assessment work for team-based learning in the sector? That's if team-based learning is something that happens in the vet sector.
I guess that's a hard one to answer from the point of view. It will probably depend on each different RTO, their particular cohorts, whether the particular trainer is wanting to do team-based learning. A lot of the time, it is an individual process in vet. So the learning might be as a collective group within the individual's cohort, but definitely the majority of assessment is an individual assessment. If there is group assessment taking place, the judgments are still made on the individual's performance. So I would say experience is the biggest thing to make assessments work in that case, because an assessor still has to be able to in the context of the whole group performing that activity, simultaneously be able to look at each individual student who's part of the group and verify within themselves, be assured within themselves that that particular student is providing enough evidence, enough suitable evidence to meet the requirements of the assessment task, which of course should have been validated to say it is meeting the unit requirements. And that simultaneous assessment of different people at once is something that an experienced assessor can do. It's a tricky thing.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that. I know team-based learning, group assessment, collaborative, any form of collaborative work can be challenging to assess, especially knowing, trying to work out who did what during the assessment.
Yes. Yes.
And I know there's a lot of work that's going into how educators assess those particular engagement pieces. In the
Mm.
online space, it can be even more challenging because,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
yeah.
And I think one of the unique aspects of vet, as opposed to, say, higher education, there's such a practical component. Every unit of competency has knowledge evidence requirements as well as performance evidence requirements. So that generally means there's some sort of skills demonstration, whether it's a live performance of undertaking the task
Mhm.
or evidence to say, this is how I've completed this in the past. And that really is wrapped up generally in an individual's performance, even if they're completing it as part of a group or a team activity. There's still such a focus on the individual's knowledge, skills, and attributes.
Yeah. Makes for an exciting learning experience. So we'd like to say a big thank you to Michelle Charlton, Principal, Specialized VET Services for our insights today.
Mhm.
And we look forward to continue talking about how things are done in the assessment design space in the vet sector.
Great to be along, and thanks so much, Chooks, for the invitation. Assessment design and development and validation is one of my key areas, and I'm very excited to have had the opportunity to be talking about it with you today.
Thank you.